Hi, everybody. It's Larry Kotlikoff, back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted to have my good friend and relative because Steve Brown is married to my cousin, uh, Jamie Stern. And I want to have Steve on the podcast because he's anybody who's ever been in Boston knows about the John Hancock building. There's a very beautiful building built by Ian Pay that Steve had a lot to do with. But also there's an old John Hancock's building, and at the top of it there's a, a beautiful light that glows red in bad weather and blue in good weather. So everybody knows the old Hancock building and the new Hancock building. But if you look carefully, go into the front doorway of the old Hancock building, there's a name on the side of the door. Well, there's a name on the door, or on the building, right on the side to the left of the front door of the old building, and it says Stephen J. Brown building.
L.
L. Bill. Stephen
Stephen
L.
L. Brown.
Stephen L. Brown. Sorry about that, Steve. Okay. So uh, the Hancock building, the old Hancock building, the original building that everybody knows about, as well as the new building, is named after Steve Brown. Steve had a 43-year career at John Hancock, started as like a summer intern in like 1958 or so. Ended his career as CEO and chairman of the board in 2001. Before that, he was a president of John Hancock. So Steve has had an incredible career running and transforming. You don't get your name on the building of the John Hancock building for nothing. We're going to find out all about why his name's on that building and his fabulous career and how he transformed the company. Steve, rather than my droning along and going through your long bio, I would like you to kind of give us a summary of your, your career at Hancock and how it is that you became president and then CEO and then CEO and chairman. Take it away.
Thank you, Larry, and it's a pleasure to be with you on this program. And I went to Middlebury College, which is actually known for languages, but I was a math major. And in looking around for possible occupations for a math major, I heard about the actuarial field, which basically is the mathematician for an insurance company. And in 1957, after my junior year, I was able to join a summer program at the John Hancock. And I actually spent that summer in the data processing department, which had one of the first gigantic UNIVAC 2 computers, which today has very little power compared to what we have. And but at the time, it was very impressive, and I didn't know much about computers, so I learned how to program computers that summer and did a lot of actuarial formulas in computers, and that was a lot of fun, and I used that for the next few years. So I was hired permanently in 1958 as an actuarial assistant. Through the years, I was promoted to various positions, ending up as vice president and actuary in charge of the actuarial area for individual insurance, which was by far our biggest product. And I figured at that point that there wasn't too much further to go, if any, and that I'd likely end up perhaps as a senior vice president in charge of insurance operations, which was my boss's job. And I certainly had no idea of being president of the company. However, at that point, the then CEO decided that the insurance operation and the investment operation of the company did not communicate well together and were
Mhm.
not coordinating on policy. And
Right.
he felt that there should be a committee that looked into this and improved things. And he asked me to chair the committee. And I did so, and we made a report. And I guess he liked the report. And a few months later, he called me into his office and he said, Steve, you made a lot of good recommendations, but one recommendation you did not make was to have a rotation program where people would go from one area to the other and
Uh-huh.
thereby learn both sides of the house.
Right.
And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. You're right. I didn't think of that." And he said, "I don't think that people from the investment area would be very good at learning about actuarial work because, after all, you have to take a whole bunch of very difficult exams to become an actuary. But I think the actuary could become an investment expert." And he said, there's a job coming up in a couple of years and at the senior vice president level in the investment area. And I would thought maybe you could rotate over there and eventually take that job. And I know that you haven't done any investment work up until now. So it's kind of risky. And you can say no if you want to. You can stay in the actuarial area.
Right.
So I said, wow, that's really interesting. And I went back and talked to my boss and some other people at work, and they all said, oh, don't take that job. You'll be competing with all these guys who have had decades of investment experience, and you've had none. You know what you're doing in this area, so you really should stay in the actuarial area. I said, that makes sense. And I went home and I talked to my wife about it. And my wife said, well, I think if you went to the investment area, you'd learn what there is to learn pretty quickly. And once you learned it, you'd move up the line. And I think you'd probably do very well in that area as you have in the actuarial area. And if you did well in both areas, they'd have to make you president of the company. And I was just knocked over by this opinion. I had never thought about it. And then I started thinking about it, and I said, you know what? She's right. This would give me a real chance to run the company. And so I went over to the investment area, and it happened just the way she said. I became the chief investment officer after about 5 years. I learned all there was to learn about the investments we were making. And when it came time to make a new president of the company, I was elected as president. And
You were
that
the
was
first Jewish president of John Hancock.
right, 1987. I was elected president,
Mhm.
and I had been in the investment area for about a dozen years. So I really knew that area. I knew the insurance area. I was really the only person in the company who had this breadth of experience.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, I'm kind of stopping this just to mention that this is a company that was started in 18, when?
yeah, I think it was about 1815, roughly. I don't remember the exact year, but in the early 1800s.
But not by John Hancock himself or his relatives. They just grabbed the name.
No, they just took the name.
So all these years, this is a kind of stayed probably uh, upper class white guys uh, financial institution, and boy, it's perhaps the oldest American a financial company. I know it's now owned by a Canadian holding company, but if you look at things like Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, all these storied companies have gone under through time, but John Hancock still exists, and you're the first kind of non-standard guy to get this job. You're not. So I think that's quite remarkable. Did you? Let me just ask you. At this point, when you became president, was there any issue of well, this guy doesn't fit in. He's not our standard type person. He's different
Well,
religion.
you're absolutely right, Larry. When I first joined the company, I'm a Jewish man, and this company was a Yankee company, meaning
Right.
that people who ran it were, people with names like Adams and Coolidge and names like that. And all my friends said to me, "Why do you want to join the John Hancock? You'll never get anywhere." And I said, "Well, I think it looks like a good company and I like the work, so I'll give it a try." And when I became um, president, the then CEO, who told me that I had been elected, told me that a couple of the board members had sidled up to him and said, "Jack, a Jewish man for president, are you sure?" And he said, what they had forgotten was that I was the first Catholic president of the John Hancock. And
Right.
so I wasn't very sympathetic with their point of view.
That's,
And I'm sure you'll do fine. So anyway, the company changed because it needed new ideas. It needed smart people. It needed to reach out beyond its historical personnel composition. And so we did, both in terms of women and blacks and Jewish people and so on. So it became quite a diverse company over the years.
uh,
And so I became president in '87. And when I became president, the chairman of the company was a gentleman named Jim Morton, also an actuary.
mhm.
And he's still alive. He's, I think, 96 or 97 years old, but he's still around. And he and I sat down and talked about strategy. And we knew that at some point we might like to become a public company. We were a mutual company. A mutual company is owned by its policyholders, basically,
Right.
whereas a public company, most people know, are owned by
Shareholder.
stockholders.
Right.
And we thought, to have access to capital and also to have access to the best people, that becoming a stock company was something that made a lot of sense. So we weren't quite ready to do that. But one of the things we decided was that we would run the company as if it was a stock company. And that involved a lot of things. I won't get into all of them, but for example, I designed a compensation system for the officers of the company that depended upon stock-like returns
Mhm.
and the ability to grow the company and so on and so forth. And that worked very well, I think. And we did a lot of other things that we hadn't done before.
So
The
yeah,
other
tell us about that. I mean, here you started in 19. You said
58,
58. Here it is 19. You become president in
87.
87, and then CEO about five, and chairman about 5 years later. Uh, and then you get your, when you retire, you have your name put on the building. You must have done some incredible things for all this for this to happen. And you're a modest guy. Brag on yourself for a little bit. Tell people So maybe, was part of it just making the thing a modern institution, and just taking all the steps that were needed, or was part of it kind of going into new areas of business that the Hancock had not been in before and expanding? Why did,
Yeah, yes, and more. And let's just quickly tick off a few things.
okay.
The other thing Jim Morton and I decided on at that initial meeting was that we needed to do something about women in the company. When I first joined the company, there was one woman senior officer in the whole company, big company. There were probably 50, 60 vice presidents and so on. One woman. And her title, believe it or not, was Vice President of Women's Affairs.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
And I thought I had the same reaction you just did. I said, you got to be kidding. You only have one, and that's her title. But that was it. Now, it turned out that we had a lot of smart women in the company, but they weren't making it. They weren't getting promoted. They weren't on the top committees. They just weren't making it. And we said, there's something wrong here. We've got to make sure that women have the same opportunity that men have, because we've got a lot of bright women, and there's a lot out there who aren't members of the Hancock who would become members if they knew that they had a chance to move ahead. So we did a lot of things to improve the situation for women in the company. For
Mhm.
example, we built one of the largest child care centers in the country, right across the street from the John Hancock. Now, that was expensive, but the employees had to pay part of it. In other words, if you used it, depending upon your rank and how much money you were making, you would pay part of the tuition. Hancock would pay the other part.
So that's really amazing for a U.S. company. It sounds almost like a Swedish company. I can't think of, I haven't never heard of a major US company that set up a childcare uh, center right next to the company so that the young women who have children, can both work and go over and see their kids next door if there's some kind of emergency, which is, I mean, that's brilliantly farsighted, and because now you have a great comparative advantage just competitively in hiring young, capable women who also want to have families.
You're absolutely right. And, we added other things like flex time, which other companies did adopt over the years, where people could sort of set their own hours.
Mhm.
And for women who were taking care of kids, that was very important to them. We
Right.
also had a system where we could take the kids and put them with seniors for vacation periods where the kids vacation and they needed something to do, and the women were working, so it was a very difficult situation for the women. And a lot of those things were done for women. We also changed the compensation overview, I would say. So, as I like to say at the time when we brought a consultant in to look at the why women weren't getting promoted and higher income and so on. And frankly, it was because most men just related to other men. I don't think they were trying to discriminate against women, but they liked people who looked like them.
Was this
And
true also of blacks and
I think
Hispanics?
we tried to do this for blacks as well. We weren't quite as successful with blacks as we were with women, but we
Mhm.
got a lot of blacks in the company from the surrounding area. Boston is full of black people, and so we were able to get a number of black people. We would send them quite often their schooling wasn't as good as it should be. And we would send them to school to relearn what they should have learned in school.
Mhm.
So we did that as well. But the women was the biggest thing because there were so many really smart women already in the company. And it
Right.
kind of built on itself because, as you say, when the women started hearing that they could go to a company that was paying attention to them and their problems, we started getting applications, by the dozen from women who were graduating and said, "Hey, this looks like a great place for me to work." They were actually planning their families around the child care center, and it was really quite amazing.
So,
So,
okay, so here's two, so changing hiring, providing modern, I mean, really futuristic, uh, accommodations for women, uh, changing the way you're, promoting, and recruiting, people of, uh, diverse backgrounds, taking the company public. These are two big things. Tell us, I mean, they're really big, but they're not probably enough to get you onto uh, the building. I want to find out why your name is engraved on that building. And I want everybody who comes to Boston or lives in Boston to go to the Hancock Tower, the beautiful tower. You'll tell us about that in a second. But go across the street to the building that has that beautiful, uh, light at the top that tells you the weather, and look at this. Go to the front door and look to the left, Stephen L. Brown building, the
it's actually, Larry, three buildings.
three
And
buildings.
three
Okay.
buildings. The original Hancock building was an 8-story building that's fronts on Clarendon Street.
Okay. Mhm.
And that's the building that's named the Stephen L. Brown Building. And the
Right.
board did that to honor me after I retired. And I had nothing to do with it. I didn't ask for it. I wasn't on the board anymore. We have a policy of not having the past CEO on the board. And so I had nothing to do with it. And but they wanted to do something a little different to honor the growth of the company. The company becoming public. We not only became public, but we were the only company that was able to sell its stock above book value.
Oh,
All the other companies it's called demutualization
right.
uh, had to sell their stock below book value because they didn't have the track record that we had of growth and earnings and uh, really looking like a stock company. And that was part of our strategy, is to try to look like a stock company by the time we were
So,
selling.
so between the time you became president and the time you left as, retired, how much of an expansion are we talking about in terms of revenue? Do you have a rough idea?
Um, I'm not sure about revenue, but I do know this on the bottom line. When I became president, we had just finished a year where there was no bottom line. In other words, the revenue and the expenses equal. And by the time I retired or went public, it was bottom line of about $600 million.
Well, a lot of money. Yeah, that's in today's dollars, that would probably be a couple trillion, I would guess, no?
So,
That,
um,
that's that's huge.
yeah, so we,
To put in perspective, our GDP in the country is about 26 trillion. Okay,
yeah,
so we're talking about maybe 1.5 trillion in profits against US GDP for the entire country for the year of 26, 27 trillion this year. It's a massive number.
yeah.
This was massively successful transformation, going from nothing to that
Well,
in
it
that
took a number of
13,
years to
13 years,
do
right?
that, but also we had to get rid of underperforming businesses. We sold our group health business. Uh, We sold a good part of our property and casualty business. We
Mhm.
added new businesses or greatly grew businesses in the financial services area, like mutual funds. We have a huge mutual fund now, and venture capital, a lot of other investment products, which I had something to do with, such as selling pension funds, timber and farmland and things like that. So all these new products were very appealing to people, and some of the old products were losing their shirt. And so, actually taking steps to change the portfolio was very important.
So Steve, it's not often that anybody gets to hear from somebody who actually runs a major U.S. corporation. What is the process like when you wake up in the morning, you say, we need to sell this division. You're probably going to face a lot of opposition because there's a lot of people who have vested interest in that, uh, by the board, by people in employees, uh, VPs, some of the 50 VPs, uh, people you've worked with for years, and now they're going to have to leave. Uh, uh, and then you're coming up with new ideas about expanding into a mutual fund company, not just an insurance company. How do you get that to happen without a lot of opposition internally? How do you, uh,
I don't think you don't. I don't think you do. I think there's always going to be a lot of opposition. Always going to be people who say, well, if we do this, we do that, things will improve. And I think you have to give a little time to people to say, okay, I'll give it another year, 2 years, and we'll take another look. But if it hasn't improved, you know, we're not going to keep it. Now,
but tell me about
mutual
the,
company, there's not a lot of pressure because policyholders really, they look at their dividends perhaps, but they don't own stock in the company. They don't feel like stockholders. And as a stock company, you have a lot of pressure from Wall Street to do the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So I felt we shouldn't wait until we were a stock company to start doing these things, but we should do them first and then try to sell our stock at a reasonable price. So,
and
yeah, there was a lot of opposition. And
did,
let's
did
face
you
it,
have,
it's not easy.
did you have to, in the end, say, this is the way it's going to be? Sorry, guys and gals. And
In the end, yes. Yes. In the end, people ask me all the time, ever since I retired, and I've retired a long time now, do you miss the company? And my answer always is, I miss the action. It was really a lot of action and a lot of fun in a way, but I don't miss the stress. A lot of stress when you have to let a company go or part of the company go. There are friends. My friends, some friends I have are working there, and
it's not exactly like firing them, but it's kind of like potentially firing them because they might get replaced, right?
you don't know what's going to happen to them.
Right.
And so it's a stressful job, and there is a reason why CEOs are paid so much money. And the reason I think is that there's a lot of stress to do the right thing and a lot of pressure from Wall Street. And or you have to, in our case, we put the pressure on ourselves even before Wall Street
But
came
you're
in.
also you're also taking huge risks. I mean, putting a lot of money into a mutual fund business that John Hancock had not been in before, when you're competing with Fidelity around the corner, and Putnam, and uh, T. Rowe Price, and I mean lots of other mutual fund companies. How do you why did you think you could actually be profitable in this pretty competitive industry? I mean, we now have, I think, we have more mutual fund companies than we have banks by a factor almost of two these days. We have about 10,000. And I think we have more mutual funds than we actually have security, actual individual mutual funds than we actually have security. So these mutual funds are really just different combinations of the same stuff. But
The answer is you don't know for sure, obviously. And you have to see how things go. And, there have been misses as well as hits. So, for example, one of the businesses that we got into in a big way for a while was the long-term care insurance business. And the actuaries, or the next generation of actuaries after me, did not anticipate some of the things that happened in long-term care insurance in terms of how many claims there would be and so on and so forth. And so we eventually stopped selling that business. So that was not really a great success. So
Mhm.
you're going to have some failures as well as successes if you take these risks. But the mutual fund has turned out pretty well. And
So
so
was that an issue of hiring the right people did you have to hire people away from?
we had to go outside the normal range of people that we hire to do that.
Mhm. And so that's expensive, and then they may not fit into the culture because they haven't been there for a long time. And then you're taking on all the risk because in the end, it's on you. The board can say, well, it's been nice having you president for a couple of years or CEO, but yeah, things haven't paid out. Also, some of the stuff takes a long time to ramp up, and in the meantime, the profits aren't there yet, right? It's not like the stuff. So, but Wall Street stuck with you because they could see the growth potential.
Exactly. And I think that, you have to take a certain amount of risk. You don't want to bet the company, but you have to take risk in order to get rewards, just like betting on stock market. And
Right.
typically, mutual companies were very conservative, invest in bonds, and take some of that income and pay it as dividends. And no, there was no pressure. I had to put pressure. As I said, we had to sort of put the pressure that Wall Street puts on stock companies ourselves. We had to be the internal um, pressure maker, and it wasn't easy.
So, but
Well,
Steve,
I think
you
it had a
strike.
lot to do- the fact that I was able to be successful in both the insurance side and the investment side, and have a very successful IPO and public company, and prepare the company for that. I think those were the things in the board's head that they hadn't seen before. And I think that's why I wasn't there. So I don't know what the conversation was, but I think that would be the things they would put their finger on when they said, we ought to name something after him.
That's amazing. But the other thing that's intriguing to me is, at least from my experience with you for now many years, uh, you're a mild mannered. You come across as a very mild mannered person. Uh,
Yes.
and I'm just wondering whether you had to get kind of in people's faces at some point, or pretty tough, or because we know about CEOs who have different styles, and so it'd be interesting to hear kind of what your personal style was, and uh, there's some CEOs
I
who are.
had a reputation, and the reputation was that Steve Brown he's tough, but he's fair.
Okay.
Reputation. And you may see me as a very easygoing guy, and most of the time I am. But some people would say I had a steel backbone.
Okay.
And this might show up, for example, one of the things that bothers me greatly today is that ethics is not given the respect that it used to be. It used to be when a company was looking for a top person and they put the criteria on a piece of paper of what they were looking for, a high sense of ethics would be number one. Now, in many cases, you don't see it at all.
Mhm.
And, that bothers me a great deal, and I think it also bothers me in government as well as business. And I know I was tested right away when I became president. Um, we were coming off a year, as I mentioned to you, where we hadn't made any money, which was ridiculous, but we hadn't. And so we weren't going to get any bonuses that year. But before the numbers were published and given to the board, I had a senior accounting person visit me just right after I became president. And he said, there's a different way of accounting that would result in getting 60% of our normal bonus. And I said to him, well, is this a method of accounting that you would use if it wasn't for the bonus situation? And he said, oh, no, this is all about the bonus. And I said, well, I'm glad you're honest with me, but we're not going to do it.
Right.
And so he kind of walked away with his tail between his legs. And it turned out to be a good thing because when we got to the board, somebody on the board, one of the lead people said, you're the first company whose board I've been on who came to us and said you didn't do well on bonus, but you had 18,000 excuses as to why you should get a bonus anyway. And you didn't do that. And I appreciate that. And I respect that. And from then on, when we got good bonuses, we didn't get questions.
Got it.
They trusted us. And so that was number one. And very soon thereafter, a guy from another country where we had a small joint venture insurance business came to me and he said, we can make a lot more money if we did the things other companies did. And it took me a while to understand what he was talking about. But what he was talking about was greasing the palms of the government regulators. And I said, I think that's not only unethical, I think it's illegal. And we're not going to do that. And furthermore, I'm going to have an outside auditor make sure it doesn't happen. And if the only way we can make money is to do that, we're going to get out of there. And
Right.
so he went away, and the word went out pretty quickly that Steve Brown was a straight arrow, and we were going to do things the right way or the highway.
So here,
I
couple
don't
other,
see that today as much. I'm not saying all companies are unethical, but I don't see that emphasized as much. I think our politics has something to do with that. And I don't want to get into a political discussion, but there used to be a much more um, uh, weight given to having a high sense of ethics. And I always slept well, knowing that I had tried to do the right thing.
so you interacted, well, I had a couple of things or questions come to mind here. One is there's so many transformations you're making and making decisions. Uh, you did this with a lot of help, I guess, with good lieutenants to help advise you, but you must be spending every day on a different major decision, one day after the next. You can't be on top of all the details. So how did you actually
You
pull
know,
this off.
the traditional saying in business, the one I believe in, is you hire people that are smarter than you are. You don't hire dumb people. And, you don't want to have to make every decision without a lot of input from very bright people. And so that's what I tried to do, is hire the brightest people I could find and listen to what they said. I didn't always do what they said, but most of the time I got good advice.
Mhm. And you're not an arrogant person. Just what you just said indicates that you're the opposite. But in all your interactions over the years with other presidents and CEOs of major corporations, which I'm sure you had because of your position, did you come across, half, 25% that you thought were just over their heads or were the wrong personality for the job, that they were your
I think the most biggest surprise I got was on the women thing. I had a lot of CEOs, including local Boston CEOs and Massachusetts companies, but other companies as well, who came to visit me. And they said, "How did you get so many women in the senior positions?" Because this was after a number of years at working at it. And I would, tell, just like I told you, some of the things we did. And, they were fine with things that didn't cost any money. But as soon as I said something cost some money, they weren't interested. They
Mhm.
were so bottom line that they couldn't see that this was beneficial to have women treated equal to men and appeal to the brightest women in the country. And that was a big surprise. But for the most part, you don't get to be CEO unless you're pretty bright.
Got something on the ball. So
Mm.
you did, okay. So uh, and the companies that you saw do really well, and the companies that you saw, the big companies that you saw do really poorly, could you have kind of connected that ahead of time with who was running it? Did you, I mean, I grant you that everybody who's at that level must have something on the ball, but some people are like too arrogant for their own good, and some people are too passive, uh, too conservative. Did you have any, could you have kind of forecasted any major
Well,
disasters from,
hard to forecast, but we would usually, if an area was not doing well for a period of time or as well as you thought it could do, you would replace that person with another person you thought could do it better, rather
Mhm.
than put the whole organization. That was kind of a last resort, putting the organization out of business.
Got it, got it, got it. Well, great. Well, this has been, I think, very revealing. Is there any, you had this amazing career starting at a low level. Uh, is there any kind of, a lot of younger people, middle-aged people who are, switching careers, trying to find their way. I think they get some insight into uh, making their way through this podcast, because we have so many people who, started out doing X and ended up doing Y. Uh, do you have any kind of parting lessons for people that might be thinking about, well, how could I become Stephen L. Brown and end up with my name on some historic building in Boston?
Well, you have to work your tail off.
Yeah.
And I think you should always try to do what you think is right. and don't compromise with things that other people think are right, but you don't. And I think, for example, back to a company that when I was a young senior officer, I was a second vice president, and the company was run by a management committee. Management committee would invite people to sit in the audience and listen. And one day they were going to vote on buying a piece of a property and casualty company, which had, I would call it long-term tail risks. And by that I mean they were asbestos suits where the insurance company was in trial. And they were going to have to pay up for asbestos problems. And they said, well, it's okay. That piece of their business is walled off by this reserve that we're putting up. And so we should buy it anyway. And it wasn't in my bailiwick at the time, but I was curious and I looked into it. And I didn't think we should buy it. I thought it was very risky. And I actually raised my hand at the management committee where they were deciding whether to buy it or not. And I said, look, they say it's walled off, this risk. It's not really walled off, and you won't know for 20 years how these trials come out.
Right.
No actuary is smart enough to figure out the dimensions of the risk, and you really shouldn't do it. And I thought I was going to be fired right then and there. I mean, people were really mad at me, especially the people who were pushing this idea. And but I stuck to my guns, and I said, well, if they fire me, they fire me. They didn't fire me, but they remembered. The amazing thing was, and the life isn't fair part of it, was that I was right. But by the time I was right, which was years later, it showed up. I was the president of the company. So I
Right.
had to take some responsibility for this disaster.
Oh,
Where
so
I'm
they
the only one who
objected to it.
yeah.
I see. Let me ask you one last question, which
You know,
is,
you have to do what's right. You have to say what's right, what you think is right, and take your chances.
so there's also kind of in that story, short-term profits versus long-term losses. And when you talked about the CEO who said, well, we don't want to incur any cost of, we're happy to have provide hire women, but we don't want to necessarily help young women have children if it's going to cost anything. Was that a reflection of the fact that their compensation was tied to the short-term profits or the stock value, and that I mean, is that something that
Well, Larry, I'll be honest. We had a consultant come in and take a look as part of this. Let's improve women's situation. We had a consultant look at the compensation decisions that had been made over the years as between men and women.
Mhm.
And I would say that if we hadn't done anything, we were at least subject to uh, criticism, lawsuits.
Right,
You know, women were not getting treated appropriately. And
right,
we had to talk to heads of divisions and various operations and say, look, we're going to we're going to have our consultant look at these decisions about who gets paid, who gets promoted,
Mhm.
even who gets put on important committees, you
Right.
know, and things like that. And we want to see women well represented in all these areas, and they did.
Well,
They-
that's a great you know, a great achievement and example for other companies. Obviously, this is an ongoing issue. We have people that are, focused in many companies around the country on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's become a kind of a acronym now, DEI. But then we have other people pushing back and saying that this is somehow reverse discrimination. But
I would say it depends how you do it. I mean, it could be reverse discrimination, but if you're doing it to try to give equal opportunity to people, no matter their sex or their color or whatever, then it's a good thing. And you don't do it just because the government changes. You know, the governments change all the time and they have different, one government says, oh, this is really good, and another government says this is really bad. And affirmative action is in one year and out the next year. You do it because you want to get the best people.
yeah, good way to end the podcast because it's all about economics, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And this goes back to the basic proposition that discrimination is not is generally speaking a financially losing proposition because
Right.
you're making decisions on the basis of something that's not connected to the profitability, viability of your company. And other people are not going to make decisions based on racism or sexism because they know better. And in the end, you will lose out. So it just doesn't pay. Forgetting whether it's appropriate, ethically, it's inappropriate, but apart from that, it just doesn't pay. So, Steve, thank you so much. This has been a really insightful and terrific interview. So we'll leave it at this, and I hope to see you soon. And
Thank you,
best.
Larry. Look forward to seeing you.